Hey y'all, welcome to our Stuff and Things in Blackness series wrap up. Since the premiere of our 3-part series, a whole lot has happened. Protests are still ongoing, and even though media attention has slacked, we're starting to see some real response to calls for police reform, defunding, and abolition. Right now, states all over the country are introducing legislation to reform the police, and it's even happening in our federal government as we speak.
The judicial system is still mad problematic. We see it in its responses to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and Elijah McClain.
Communities, especially in the South, are struggling with voter suppression and issues with passing hate crime bills.
Even the social media outcries, Blackout Tuesday, petitions, several calls to action. Where do we go from here?
Questions?
That's a great question.
For real. I mean, it's encouraging to see that there's legislation in action. I understand that some of those bills are at a standstill because the parties can't agree on different parts of the bill. Big surprise. But even on more local levels, I know in Athens, Georgia, there's a bill being introduced to ban the use of tear gas against protesters. I know, which you think would already be the case, considering that it's banned in war, during war.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Right?
That's crazy.
There are places like in Colorado that has passed a sweeping police reform bill, and it includes the banning of chokeholds and carotid control holds, even though there are places where that's banned and the officers still do it, like in New York State.
Exactly. For years.
Hence why I said sweeping in quotations. I think Colorado is also the state that got rid of qualified immunity, which is the loophole that police officers are able to use to get out of being indicted for crimes against people, against citizens, especially those that result in a fatality. And we're starting to see our people on the ground, the people who've been doing this work for years and calling for abolition of policing in our communities for years, getting a chance to have the spotlight and introduce how we actually do this by relying on our mental health professionals and social workers and those who are specialists in cases of abuse or sexual assault, or programs and projects that are tailored towards homeless and runaway youth. Like, all of these things are present. The infrastructure is likely already there. These people have been working in their communities and in their organizations for decades. And it's high time we start utilizing what we have here. I think
that's the most encouraging thing. Like, I don't really care much for legislation. I care about like the idea of the policy of abolishing police and actually really engaging with that. And that's been at least an idea that's being brought into the mainstream. And I know like people think, oh, well, you bring it into the mainstream, does it even matter? But if an idea is in the mainstream, that's how it sort of gets legs. That's sort of like similar to like at least even, Obamacare, which is not really like the sweeping legislation that was needed to resolve all the issues of healthcare in this country, but it was brought into the mainstream, and now people are talking about Medicare for all. So let's bring in abolishing police into the mainstream. I think, as I mentioned earlier, like in our little like beginning part, the place that because that I'm close to as a lawyer, but I don't go to court ever. But the fact of the matter is, the legal system, the judicial system, how this country meets out justice will always be an issue. In that, like Ahmaud Arbery's people just got murdered. People, apologies, because I'm very casual in how I speak, and that's not what I meant. They are not his people. They are his murderers. The people who murdered Ahmaud Arbery, they just got indicted. The people that murdered George Floyd have been charged, and at least one of them is walking free. The people who murdered Rayshard Brooks, one I think hasn't posted bail, and one's out walking free. Breonna Taylor, her murderers are out there. As far as I know, nothing has happened. There ain't been a reprimand or nothing. And as I mentioned earlier, which has been brought again into the mainstream discussion, not something that we discovered, but now that we're talking about, if you're talking, we're all being educated, and I have been educated. Elijah McClain was murdered, and his murderers ain't nothing happened. Not a word. It's like let me not even the collective we, I did not know about this. And hearing about that young man's death, he was like, crossing over into the 30s and realizing that there are younger people than you out there in their 20s. It seemed like I was a 23-year-old once. I didn't know always how to even carry myself. I was still like working out what life looks like. What does it look like to be a grown up? And for him to be killed and murdered, and like, it's the thing about his words. He was saying, I'm an introvert. I don't like people in my personal space. And thinking that that was something that these murderers would respond to and they would appreciate. I mean, it's soul crushing. Everything. The more you reflect, like I was thinking about it earlier. You think you give it time, and it feels. You think time would heal this? It's sinking in. It's getting deeper into the flesh. It's marinating now. Like the more you think about this stuff, the more it just sinks into your structure. And like I know because we were like in college together in 2012 when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and we marched together then. But like, the fact of the matter, we're in this sort of like the same place, that nothing has changed. And in terms of no demonstrative policy or rethinking of the judicial system that allowed for, I won't even say his name because I don't even know it. I don't really care about Trayvon Martin's murderer. But that let him walk free, it's the same judicial system that can easily let the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and it did it for Elijah McClain's murderers too. That needs to be addressed along with this. It's an illness on this country, and we will never know true justice in any way until we deal with that. But it is good but for me, I do celebrate that abolishing police. For somebody like, you'd asked me 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago maybe, about even abolishing police as a concept, I would have said it's too radical. But for it to be brought into the mainstream, and I'm here, and I'm like, we need to get rid of that. We need to change how we handle our communities. Like, I feel like that's a good thing. That is an amazing thing.
It's too radical?
Yeah, I would, to really think about like the radical nature of it. It's unfortunate that we do have to be radical and go to the absolute extreme in order for our systems to even work with us, right? It's like we gotta go get rid of them all to like, all right, that's a little bit too much. Okay, maybe we can do all these different things, all the things we've been asking for from the very beginning. It's just, again, like, we're not looking for revenge against the police. We just want justice. We just want equality. We just want you to do what we know is right, like demilitarizing the police. Like what?
No.
As we just heard, like tear gas is not even used in war, but we would use it against our own people.
And having the proper systems in place, that's the main thing too, to respond to specific calls if you have people that have issues with mental health. I know that they're working on a hotline now. I think I saw it on the news yesterday. I want to say by next year, or hopefully, I think it's the 2 years, they're going to make 988 a worldwide number that you can call instead of calling the police, but you'll reach out to mental health professionals.
Wonderful thing, because the police are not equipped to answer any calls like that. And I wouldn't be surprised that the young man who just lost his life, he's been practicing that speech for so long, just in case he got into any type of, conflict with the police, that they will hear him. That was a speech, for God's sake. Like, it's terrifying.
He was, if you're talking about Elijah McClain, he was murdered in August of 2019.
In August, yeah.
That's almost a full year ago.
Yeah.
And now, similar to how people are calling for Sandra Bland's murderers to be arrested, for other people who have been murdered, we're calling. I think it's good to raise our voices. So let's look back. Tamir Rice's murderers. People have been signing petitions about that. So,
he would have been 18 today.
Yeah,
today is his birthday.
Yeah, so it's really truly unfortunate that we're still here, and it doesn't help that our prosecutors, our state prosecutors, are being forced to step down because of the issues in our federal judicial system right now. It's just a bit much. So it really takes us being radical and us coming together as a community to truly put our foot down and make very actionable and clear demands of our system. It's not enough to just say, we want this, we want this. It's not about how we want it. Yeah, we do, but how are we going to get it? And I think that we are now in a space to be very clear. This is exactly what needs to happen. If you're going to do this, then you need to do that. This is how it's going to benefit communities of color. This is, and as we have learned time and time again throughout history, once we start fighting for our rights as Black people in this country, it benefits everybody. And, and it's just what it is, right? So just like we're fighting, there's going to be pushback. I mean, for God's sake, there's people are just crazy. They're fighting to even wear masks. So we can't, when we're thinking about what we're fighting for on the streets to get justice, it seems pretty ridiculous, right? It seems ridiculous that that's what you're concerned about. You're concerned about your freedom to wear masks, but not the freedom of people. This is insane. And I think that we are now conscious of it, and shout out to the Gen Zs and the TikTok folk and the kids on, the kids who are K-pop fans who are protesting in their own way, in the way that they know how. They are doing a great job. What you say?
So we see you Zoomers.
We see y'all out here making a statement. Keep making those statements.
I wanted to react to something you said about revenge. And I've been constantly thinking, I think we've talked about it since we, personally at least, about what Jeralisa said during the way we ended part 1 of the series. I want to take your house. I want you to lose your house. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because that's not necessarily how I engage with the world, through revenge or through pettiness. I looked up, my sign says, I'm a Pisces, so they say we're not people, we don't take pettiness funnily. And so I don't engage in that. But I've recently been exploring the idea, what does revenge really look like? What does it feel like? And that is something that's been surprising to see from this moment of yes, vengeance, a little revenge, a lot of revenge might be a bit of an answer.
But that's so sad that we got to do that just to bring attention to matters that seem so simple.
But it is crazy out there. I see something new every day. I mean, we just had Andres Guardado in California, the security guard who was shot, and the police officers broke all the cameras and went inside and stole all the video and brought a warrant after the fact. I'm seeing crazy stories of police officers in different places around the U.S. who are involved and complicit and outright running child sex trafficking rings.
Mm-hmm. We have both forces quitting because we're holding them accountable.
Exactly. And not to mention the lynchings that are being considered suicides without any investigation.
And the scares, like, you know, even with the NASCAR driver, right? Like, you can't how does it not make sense? It drives you mad, right? Even thinking about it. And like you were just mentioning, Andrew, about like how you would think this kind of like what time it will go away and like you'll come to terms with it. But it makes me more mad the more that I sit in this and have a conversation about it.
Because with Trayvon Martin stuff, I remember like, when I think about it, it gets me. But like, I remember the outrage in 2012. I remember the verdict, I think in 2014. And like,
I never forget the lawyers' daughters tweeting that they went out for celebratory ice cream afterwards.
When you think about it, it hits you. But when I'm at work today and I'm working and like starting and like my mind sees something that forces me and I break down in tears, it's like, it's never been unforgotten. It's just been, we have so much to carry on as Black. Blackness is about carrying so much in you all the time that you can't really engage with.
That chronic stress kills us.
And I mean, my theory is, why do Black people, I love to go to church. I love church. I love Black church specifically because it's one of the few places in society where you can scream with other people, where you can yell, where you can move, where you can shake off stuff, and it's appropriate and you're doing it together. And I think that's why, I mean, it's just been something that's been floating in my mind. Why do we like that? Why do we do that in our spiritual? Because there's so much spiritual weight that we're carrying around all the time. There's, I mean, even like this idea that, have y'all heard of the white voice? That when you're talking to white people, you put on a different type of voice. Like it's Hugh's poem, I wear the mask that grins and smiles, all that stuff, is that we carry around so much that is just eating at us that we're not allowed to necessarily express all the time. And that's what I'm synthesizing in a new way of, there's so much hurt about how our Black bodies are treated in this country. There's so much pain that we plaster or we just to be able to manage, because we also want to live fun and cool and interesting lives. And so in order to do that, sometimes we plaster or we ignore or we don't engage with aspects of it. But now being in quarantine and seeing the people, the reactions, I can't not disengage. And I'm bringing it to the forefront. It's no longer like deep down in the bones, it's on the surface. It's on the surface of every day, of everything that I do, it's on the surface. And so that's why like I've been saying like, oh, I'll sit here and for some reason, why am I crying? Oh, because it's on the surface now.
And even in the midst of that, we have to constantly remind ourselves, I am Black. I love me. I matter.
I wouldn't
My people matter. And we want the world to recognize that we matter just as much as they do and treat us as such, period.
And I feel like we're definitely seeing a shift now too. And it's a shift because it's something that the entire world can't escape from now, because we have social media, because it's everywhere now. You can't turn on the TV. You can't look on social media. You can't watch a news or read an article without them mentioning the Black Lives Matter movement. I think I saw on TV, I think it's a new Procter & Gamble commercial where there's Black skin and talking about the trauma that we deal with. And then you see white skin and then talking about the guilt and the onus and the ownership that white America must take in order to assist us with the effort. Yeah. And I think that starts with recognizing the issues and really feeling it on a deeper level. I know we've talked a lot about empathy right now, empathy versus sympathy, but it's even deeper. It's feeling it, like you mentioned, Andrew, feeling it to your core, feeling it in your bones. And it is definitely heightened because we are in quarantine, because we are in the middle of a pandemic. So emotions are running all over the place already because of that. But it's something that we're like, yeah, we're here. Like the pressure is here, and we're gonna keep this pressure going until we see change, until we see reform. And I think I know you talked about like revenge / change or efforts towards change. And one way we could do that, on a local level, on a national level, is through voting. But we still see a lot of complications and issues with that. I'll speak personally. I'm in Atlanta. We just had our primary on June 9th. I requested an absentee ballot. My mom and I mailed our ballots like a month and a half before the primary because it's a pandemic and because we wanted to remain safe and mail it in or have the option of dropping it in the day of, which we ended up doing. My dad, all three of my family members received it on the same day. My mom and I sent it out, let's say on a Tuesday. My dad mailed his on a Wednesday. My mom and I received ours. My dad never received his. And I read an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and before Labor Day, they had a backlog of, I want to say, like 80,000 requests that hadn't even been fulfilled. So there were a number of people in Georgia, especially in Fulton County, which is a predominantly Black county, did not receive their absentee ballot. So a lot of people had to vote in person. So that morning, my mom and I dropped it off at one of the polling locations we actually had to go to one. There was some confusion with that, which was another issue. And then we had to go to another because there was just issues with, it was saying one thing that we could deliver it to our regular polling place, but we had to go to another to put it in like the secure ballot boxes that we had here. And there was a crazy line at 7 a.m. when it started. And I went to the front to ask the woman at our polling place where I need to drop everything off. And it was so frustrating because there was so much confusion. There was a huge line. The woman mentioned to me that the ballots, the voting machines arrived at 7 a.m. at the time that the doors were supposed to be open. There were only 2 voting machines there. My dad ended up having to go in person later that day around noon. He said they had 6 later in the day. But just so much frustration and so many issues, which I'm sure you all have seen on the news, of just people having to wait in long lines, issues with voting machines. Last year, the Secretary of State,
who's now the governor?
Who's now the governor, but the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who's the current Secretary of State. They rolled out new voting machines that they tested out on a really small election at the end of last year. And they had a lot of issues with it then, but they said, we'll work it out by the time we've had the general elections. People didn't know how to work the polling machines. The screens would black out. There was some locations where people were constantly turned away because the machines weren't working. They didn't have enough paper ballots, not enough provisional ballots for people.
Oh, you said because they won't work.
Because they won't work. And then they were saying, the counties that they had the most issues, the Black counties, they're predominantly Democratic counties.
Well, you can't just give the Democratic part, it doesn't matter, right? So
that's the thing, it doesn't matter. But they were saying that was their responsibility to make sure that the machines and everything ran smoothly.
They say none of the other counties had problems.
None of the other counties, the predominantly white counties in the surrounding area,
know how to operate the machinery correctly.
It enraged everybody in that county, everybody in that state. Nobody has a chance to have their voice heard.
Exactly.
But
I will say, people stood in line. People waited. There were people out to 2-3 in the morning
because they know how much it matters. We have people who have died trying to cast a ballot.
I watched Selma, the movie by Ava DuVernay, maybe a week or so ago. I was just going through Amazon Prime and it was free. And what she, what Toddy said, people died, people were beaten, people put their bodies literally on the line for the ability of Black people to vote. People put their lives on the line for the ability to exercise the franchise. And it's insane hearing Kristin, who lives in 2020, who is smart, who went to Georgetown University, who is capable and has so much ability, hearing that like they're trying to get you. They're trying to keep you from speaking, from your voice being elected, and like from your voice speaking in elections. And it's just so unfair. Mm-hmm. That is so unfair.
Yeah, so we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. The 13% of us in this country got a lot of work to do. We're a small number, and it seemed like everything is out to get us. But us as a Black people, we have come up against issues that we probably can't even imagine, in 2020. We will get through this. We'll keep pushing through this. And we just gotta be true to ourselves. We shouldn't have to.
Do we have to bring this country into equality and justice? Is it our labor?
We've been doing that from the very beginning. Right?
Is it fair? How much does I know we have to advocate and fight for ourselves. I get that. But in another context, it's like this work, this stress, this fight can take so much out of you.
It hurts.
It hurts you. It
physically, mentally.
You. It pulls you away from as a lot of us are artists, it pulls us away from like that internal exploration, because we are put in a necessary place of pressure that, it bursts so much beauty, it bursts so much realness, it bursts so much transformation, but it also, it's born from a place of pain, that rather than art being born from freedom, from liberty, from joy, and I think it's unfair again.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to our question that, that Kristin posed so well. How do we protect our Blackness? Because it is painful. It hurts. It literally pulls the life out of us. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very intentional. Yes, we have these battles to fight, but we got to survive. We got to get through this. We got to thrive. We need to raise the next generation of people who will live, right? Remember we talked about, we've been struggling for a long time. We've been trying to survive. We are still trying to survive. We need to live, and unfortunately, whether we want to think about why do we have to do it, it's not fair. It's still our fight. Yeah. It's still our fight in 2020, just like it was our fight, in 1892 and in 1963 and 2000. It's still our fight. So we got to protect our Blackness. We got to fight for our rights. And we have to make sure that we as a community are on the same page so that we can do the right thing. And that's bring justice to everything, really. There's we can list healthcare, education, policing. We could go down, the list of all the things we need justice for here. So in the midst of it, you got to protect your Blackness.
There's so much work to do. There's a laundry list of things, internal and external, that have to be broken down. But it all has to happen simultaneously. And that we are here, and that we are the ones who made it. Yeah. Since our ancestors crossed over the Atlantic Ocean, means that we have the strength.
We survived to do it. So that we can thrive. We're here.
Exactly. That there is beauty. I was at a young adult ministry Zoom call for my church last weekend, and we talked about beauty for ashes and how God exchanges, your ashes for beauty. And I think that is honestly something that is so true for what it means to be Black people. But one thing, I know we wanted this to be a little bit shorter, but I do want to ask y'all, what have y'all been, so we talked, we had that, we really, even looking back at that conversation now, it gets me a little bit emotional. It gets me I'm a very emotional person, but it makes me emotional because there it is in a moment, encapsulated initial reactions to a lot of things that have been going on. And it was very, very fresh. very, I mean, like raw. It was not even surface level. It was 3D. It was rising out of us. And I wonder, what have y'all been doing, maybe as like a wrap up to this conversation, what have y'all been doing since then? How have you been protecting your peace? How have you been aiming for peace? Because it's hard. It's hard, I think. But not even hard. It needs to be intentional, rather. So what have y'all been doing?
I've been doing two things.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, my two things. One, how can I be more involved in the next generation of Black kids and kids of color in this country? So I have the privilege of being able to host a podcast for our first gen low income students who are coming into Georgetown. And the podcast is literally like what you need to know, like, right? Like how to get through this first year, how to confront the issue of, injustices, of whiteness in these spaces. How do we talk about that in the context of figuring out how to take notes well, right? Figuring out how to navigate these classes well, as our next generation of intellectuals in this space, similar to what we were just mentioning about Kristin, right? She's going through this too. And she's trained, like it's like, how, but making sure that they know that there are other people who've come before them who have some gems to offer, and hope that they take it and go out into the world and make change better than what we're doing right now. So that's one. And two, I have a guitar that I've had for so long that I never picked up. Actually, Andrew has touched my guitar and did more things with it than I have. But I taught myself how to play.
A couple of years.
Yeah, I know. I taught myself how to play 2 songs.
Yay!
And I've been finding.
There are my 2 guitars there.
Yeah, I've been finding more joy in music. And, there's something about like the soul of Black people, it's music, right? So, when I think about and reflect in that, I don't know, there's something, I listened to John Batiste, there was a video that he did, he works with the Aspen Institute sometimes, and he was on the piano and it just captivated me in a way that I can't explain to this day. And there was something about the soul in that music and that darn piano that I was like, I want to create my own music. How do I feel right now? So it was, and I learned 2 songs in one night. So this is way beyond, and I'm studying for an exam. So this is way beyond I could have ever imagined, to really be able to deal with this, because I have to give my soul joy. But I also feel like I have to do my part, in being a Black person in America.
I love that.
Same. I've been intentionally resting, taking time to do things where I'm not having to think, whether that's actually take a nap or just sit outside for a short period of time and not feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
I've also been reflecting on the lessons of my ancestors, the ones that I lived with and touched and learned from, and how I can utilize those lessons to move forward with my own training and skills and things that I'm passionate about, and how I do that effectively outside of the framework of a white ethnocentric supremacist capitalist system. So, yeah.
I think for me, I've been trying to take social media in doses. That doesn't always happen, but not constantly expose myself to not only the messages, but also just a lot of the videos people are posting, a lot of the violence against Black folk that you see on a regular basis on social media. You get enough of that in the news. So I try and take time to give myself space from that. Not that I don't think that it is important. We need to continue to highlight what's going on. But I think in order to protect your Blackness and protect your mental health and wellness, you have to be able to take a break from it and center yourself in the midst of everything that's going on. I think a lot more writing and like trying to write material that's completely separate from everything that's going on. Like something silly, like within the podcast, we're hoping to create or add more of an artistic element to a lot of our videos. So working on that and finding a lot of joy and going back to writing a lot of joyful pieces. That's what I have been focused on at the moment, is trying to find the humor and the joy in the midst
Well, for our very astute watchers, listeners, you know, I have a different background than I moved. I got a new apartment, and so that was a very good distraction for a while. But because I have more space than I did prior to now, one of the things that I do, I was sort of inspired by something I saw on Tracy Ellis Ross's Instagram, is now before I go to sleep, I dance. I turn up the music in my space, and I have a little, you know, just a
dance party.
It doesn't even, it might not always even be on rhythm. But it's just like, get it out, just get it out of your body so there's a little less tension. And of course, I mean, I've been listening to, I put it on Twitter that I've been listening to Negro spirituals, but the one that I've had on repeat is Satan, we're going to tear your kingdom down. And interpreting that, Satan, your system of racism, of inequity, of injustice, we're going to tear that down. And that's been such a good motivator of like, yes, I feel it. I'm here. I am going to use my life, my platform from here on out to tear down the kingdom of injustice, inequity, racism. We're going to tear that kingdom down because I know there's a perfect kingdom in heaven, but God is requiring us, in my personal belief, to try to make that here. And we're all called to that. And so that's been like a great sort of like, Satan, we're going to tear this. Every time I say Satan, I'm going to tear that down. Satan, I'm going to get that. We're going to get those cops. And I feel like abolishing police might be one of those kingdoms.
Yeah. Y'all, Andrew also very recently started using salt when he cooks his food. That has been life-changing.
Right. Let me clarify.
You were doing that beforehand? Okay.
Clarify. I don't want to, I was trying to reduce, for years, I've been reducing my sodium. I was like, right,
fair.
I got to have too much sodium and look for other seasonings to give flavor to your food. I've been using a lot of garlic, a lot of onion, a lot of, herbs, rather Italian seasoning. And I made fried chicken, not fried chicken for the first time, but fried chicken thigh breast.
Put salt in it.
Not a thigh breast, fried chicken thighs in my air fryer.
Did it have salt in it?
Yes, it did.
Okay, just making sure. You can't have no saltless fried chicken. That ain't fried.
No, it was a.
That's just meat.
No, this is
bread on it.
Having my own place. I almost smacked myself. It was so good. I said, "This is the damn best fried chicken." I made it for myself.
Where have you been all my life?
I knew it's not salt. I know salt adds flavor. I generally don't, because I'm not a salty person. I like salt, but I generally don't add. I mean, I've been trying to use other flavors, but salt is necessary. As I think I've crossed, like for the majority of my 20s in cooking, I did not use much salt, even though I know salt is a good thing to add.
Even the Bible says, "Be the salt of the earth."
Hello.
I know salt is a good thing to add.
Put it in your food. Put it in the food.
Just even if it's a little bit.
And now it is.
You get a grinder, do a little sea salt if you don't want to put too much.
My sea salt.
Make sure every now and then you have some salt, iodine, because we need iodine.
Salt Bay? Was it not salt? Was it Salt Bay? What was the guy?
Salt Bay.
Salt Bay.
I do use salt. It's not as a rejection of seasonings. It was trying to replace salt with other seasonings that are good for you and will not increase your salt. But yes, I have been starting to cook with salt.
We're very proud of you.
A lot better. So don't give up on salt, no matter what. I guess the lesson. Life's too short, and we get to have the pleasures.
Yeah.
Eating your pleasures. It's always a pleasure being with you. I love y'all so much.
Love y'all.
Takeaways. Continue to fight against systemic racism.
Ooh.
Take breaks.
Yes.
Work on your mental wealth and your mental health.
Hey.
And use salt in your food. Season your food.
Please. That'll be great. And make sure to protect your Blackness.
Protect your Blackness.
By any means necessary. Not any means. Don't.
By all means necessary.
All
protect
means.
your Blackness.
By any and all means.
Yes, there you go. There you go. All right.
Oh, look at y'all. Y'all so brown and whatnot, black and whatnot.